Tonight we have 5 stories, starting things off with a story of a house for sale, and moving into stories about a police officer's time in the force, an unwelcomed visitor, and a creepy night drive story. We will be closing things off with a longer story that does have a central theme that may be sensitive to some viewers. I wouldn't feel right not letting you guys know ahead of time. However, it is a fictional story that is entertaining in a sci-fi type of way. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit r/slumberreads or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I moved back to my hometown just a few months ago. My time in California was amazing. The vineyards, the mountains, the amazing produce, the roar of the Pacific cascading onto the rocky cliffs below CA1, blanketing the calls of sea lions unseen, but omnipresent. The landscape was a welcome shock from the flatness of home, and my time, like those peaks and rolling foothills, was the grand adventure I'd only hoped it could be. I cherished the people I met, and the overall life experience I had, but the truth was clear. I missed home. The traffic and cost of living left me on edge, and I badly longed for the tranquility and comfort that my sleepy coastal town brought. That's where the story begins. At the start of a return home to peace, at the start of 2020, a year with so much promise and expectation for us. My wife and I bought a house less than 2 miles from where I grew up, in a town covered by the tall swaying pines of a maritime forest. The house was our dream. After renting a small apartment that cost a large fortune, we were delighted to buy a 4,000 square foot Victorian on a large piece of wooded land that sat on the edge of a private lane near a creek running toward the sea. Sure, the place was old and required a great deal of work, but we were happy with the privacy, space, and unbelievable price, a significant discount from our rent in California. There are a handful of memorable incidents leading up to us scrambling to find a realtor and putting the place back on the market today, at a discount, now in the midst of a global pandemic, when no one wants to go house hunting or move. I'm sure there were other incidents over these few months that were unnoticed, as happens when attentions are paid elsewhere, but these are all I can recall as I sit here, hungover, attempting to document the situation. We spent the first week in our new house getting most of the furniture we brought with us in place. It wasn't a very big job, considering the lack of space we had in California, and we were looking forward to shopping for items to fill rooms in the themes we had always discussed when the time came to do so. By our first full weekend in the new house, I found that most of the heavy lifting was complete, and the chores that remained required my wife's meticulous nature to manage the proper way. So I wisely retreated to the backyard to begin raking leaves that had accumulated over the months since the previous owners had left. There wasn't much to the yard. The property very quickly became thick woods, but I had vision of laying down sod in the spring and having some grass for Rockambeau, my faithful golden retriever, to lay on. We had a magnificent back deck that stretched out high and prominent from the house, with stairs leading down to the planned patch of green. Lattice surrounded the deck. The thick ivy engulfed it in such a fashion that concealed the underneath. The workmanship was not perfect though, because Rockambeau was quick to find openings that granted him access to the dark, earthy underworld that immediately became his go-to hangout and left him smelling of mushrooms and moss. On this particular occasion though, Rockambeau, my typically strong and silent companion, lost his ever-loving shit, well hidden under the deck. I dropped the rake and called for him, but the full throttle barking continued, moving from his typical, intimidating Goldie Wolf toward the higher pitched call he makes when scared. I could see nothing through the opening, and he would not come out when called. This went on for some time. I went into the house to fetch the treat jar, a surefire way to coerce him into anything, but even the allure of milk bones loudly rattling in their jar did not stop the barking or bring out my dog. Starting to panic that he was stuck, I sent my wife for a flashlight so I could see, but with boxes still unpacked, she could not find it. I went to help, and after what felt like an eternity, I located it in a kitchen box of all places and went to help pour Rockambeau. When I got to the kitchen, I noticed the barking had stopped. On the back porch, I could see Rockambeau, trembling, nose pressed on the glass of the back door, waiting to be let in. My wife and I spent a few minutes consoling the dog before I went to check beneath the porch. My fear was that he got mixed up with some animal, and I was worried about rabies. Under the deck, I shined the light and saw nothing but dirt and what appeared to be trash in the far corner. I gave up and decided we should just play it safe and take him to the vet. There were no signs of injury, so the vet sent us home, and we dismissed it as one of those weird occurrences in the course of dog ownership every dog owner experiences. Rockambeau was fine, but never again went under the porch. The second event came about a week later. I was in bed relatively early, and my wife was working on organizing one of the guest bedrooms. She had planned to keep some of her older, less frequently used clothing and jewelry in there to help better organize the items she wore on a day-to-day basis. At 3:21 a.m., we were awoken by a crash in the guest room. What we found was strange. An old jewelry box I bought her that was shaped like a treasure chest and could only be opened by moving components in a secret fashion had been thrown across the room from where she left it and lay shattered by the wall. We did not know what to make of this, but my wife was convinced some pieces were missing. We could not sleep again that night. The next day, we took inventory, and she determined several pieces she had seen prior to going to bed were now gone. They were mostly old costume pieces whose only real value was sentimental, as they once belonged to her grandmother. We thought about calling the cops, but wrote the whole thing off and went about our lives. We were consumed with new jobs and furniture deliveries and had soon put the oddity of that night out of our mind until the middle of February, when, once again, we were awoken at 3:21 a.m. by another loud crash. The sound of metal falling to the ground downstairs, almost like broken glass. When we turned the lights on in our dining room, we saw antique silverware scattered across the table and the wood floor. The wooden case was overturned, half hanging from the edge of the table, and the chandelier still swayed. The silverware was rarely used. Like the jewelry, the set was inherited from my wife's grandmother, an old set that had been in her family since before they came to America from Germany generations ago. Value more sentimental than financial, though these did have beautiful gold-plated handles. This time, we called the cops, but that proved to be nothing more than a waste of time. We confirmed again that a handful of pieces were missing, just 2 forks, a tablespoon, a teaspoon, and 1 knife. We filed a report and were dismissed as crazy. The nights that followed really drained me. I'd be awake at 3:21 a.m., waiting, but nothing would happen. My work was suffering, and we were regretting the biggest purchase of our lives. Finally, we settled back into our routines and tried to put the disturbances out of mind. Soon, the news of the coronavirus would become all-consuming, and we'd both be placed on telework, and new concerns would start keeping us up at night. I hadn't really thought about any of this until last night, when again at 3:21 a.m., I heard a noise. This was indistinguishable, but enough to wake me. We searched the house and found nothing. My wife went back to bed, but I stepped out on the back porch to look at the stars and have a small pour of Basil Hayden, hoping to calm my nerves. Truth is, since quarantine, I've been drinking too much. We both have. That's what I've been telling myself anyway. I was looking at the stars through the trees, with fresh leaves, feeling unseasonably cool winds when I was startled by a rustling, scraping, scurrying sound below my feet. I froze in fear, uncertain of what I was hearing, but certain something was moving beneath my deck, to the far corner, the one where I saw the pile of trash. Whatever this was, it was small, but deliberate. I was in the middle of convincing myself this was a raccoon or possum when it spoke. The voice I heard was guttural, harsh, but very quiet, like a whisper. The language was one I had never heard. "Who's there?" I yelled. With that, the whispers and rustling stopped. I retreated upstairs to tell my wife of what I had heard, but found her asleep. I lay restless for the remaining hours of last night, making frequent trips to refill the bourbon I was now heavily drinking. Finally, daylight broke through the shades this morning. Full of bravery from the bottle, I nearly finished. I went outside, flashlight in hand. I crawled through the narrow opening beneath my porch, and on hands and knees, squirmed my way to the back corner. The air smelled of mushrooms and moss, and I could feel my elbows and knees sink into the cool soft earth. What I dismissed as a pile of trash was something much, much more. This afternoon, we defied stay-at-home orders, and I sent my wife to stay with her sister. As I finished typing this, on my dining room table rests a small treasure. Among it, my wife's jewelry and our silverware, as well as several other pieces belonging to us, including medals won at work, candlesticks, and napkin rings. All gold. We never noticed those vanish. They are a small pittance of the total collection I retrieved from beneath my deck. Mostly, there are items of gold and silver I do not recognize, and whose age clearly predates us. Beside the pile of treasure sits a full bottle of Basil Hayden and a pistol. I'm ready for 3:21 a.m. My house is for sale. I worked as a police officer in Boston. My father was part of the Boston PD task force that worked against the Winter Hill Gang in the 70s. There's a photo of my grandfather escorting the Boston Strangler out of the courthouse in 1960. So Boston law enforcement is in my blood. Most think Boston is a normal city, that it's just like any other, only with more Dunkin' Donuts and Tom Brady jerseys. But in 11 years of working for the BPD, I've seen too much to think Boston is normal. I've lived in Boston for all 38 years of my life. I've been working in Boston for 20 years, as an officer for the last 11. I moved out when I was 18 for college, and told myself I'd never live with my parents again. But after my mom passed and my dad got sick, me and my fiance, Vanessa, moved in with my dad to help take care of him. So I was back living in South Boston. Yet again, I was a Southie. I had to switch departments, which was sad, as I'd been working at A7 for the first 2 years on the job, where nothing of note really happened, but I admit it was nice to be back in South Boston. My first unexplainable encounter was that I got a call over to Back Bay, which is odd. If you don't know, Boston's neighborhoods are pretty divided. For example, I wouldn't go walking around Roxbury at night without a good reason. Meanwhile, Brooklyn is like the Ritz. Back Bay is pretty ritzy too. Another odd thing about the call is that one of the residents heard something rooting through their trash. At first they thought it was a raccoon, but the damn thing roared, and they thought it might be a black bear. We get the occasional bear up in Charlestown, but Back Bay is pretty densely populated, so it's really uncommon. The alley monster. It was about 10 o'clock and I headed out to call with my partner for the night, James Anton. That's the thing movies get wrong about the police work. We don't have a set partner. We work with someone assigned the same shift as us that night. I still think Anton was dirty. He just had the look. Heavy set, greased black hair, voice that sounded like he smoked 2 packs every day since '87. Had been with the force for 24 years. He was a perfect package of corruption. We arrived at the corner of Beacon Street and Dean Road, where there was a suspected black bear rooting around in someone's trash. Officer Anton taking far longer than I. We looked around. There wasn't much else we could do. We're not going to go bear hunting in the woods for this thing, so we checked the alley between the buildings. I turned the corner only to find 3 tipped over trash cans, one with 4 claw marks cutting deep into it, all the way down the tall plastic trash bin. Officer Sherlock Anton then says, "I don't think a raccoon did this." I sort of chuckled at how profoundly obvious of a statement that was. I responded with, "I'd say that's a safe bet." We both heard what came next. A deep and guttural growl from the end of the alley. It was about 15 feet away. I shined my flashlight down, and the beam of light reflected off the beast's red eyes in the night. It was about 4 feet long, had long sharp teeth. It wasn't much larger than a dog, but it was far more intimidating. Its hot breath created steam from the cold March night. It was hairless and had blood on its lips and dripping down its snout. Its hairless skin was loose and almost looked infected. It was a true horror, and it's safe to say I was stunned. It began to move towards me, and I reached to my hip and drew my service pistol. I shot toward the alley monster but didn't connect. The thing got close enough to lunge at me. It pounced as I fired 2 more shots at it, and it dug its claws into my ballistic vest. The claws seemed to be 10 inches long and were razor sharp. It tore the cloth but just scratched against the Kevlar. Officer Anton was terrified, and while he had drawn his service pistol, he didn't do much. The creature's attack knocked me off of my feet backwards. I hit the dirt and pavement of the alley's unforgiving ground. The monster snarled at both me and Officer Pudge one more time, before taking off into the night. After a search of the area, we called animal control and told them there was a rabid animal on the loose. We also discovered multiple dead house cats in the alley that the thing had been feasting on. Officer Anton and I both filed reports, and after my shift ended, I just went home, still trying to process the whole thing. The BPD's official stance? A rabid dog that was mange. I tried to argue with the captain who finalized and signed the report that there's no way whatever attacked me was a dog, but he dismissed me every time. I stopped arguing after a week. There was really no point. Still, I hope some redneck shot it. The Phantom Strangler. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't. I think that the people that claim to have seen ghosts wanted to see them, and so they did. That being said, the second unexplained thing in my career happened over a year after the alley monster incident. It was during a day shift. It was about 8 a.m. when I was partnered with an officer named Wendell Smo. Officer Smo was a good man, probably one of my best friends on the force. We got called to South End, where a man said he woke up to a man attempting to strangle him. We assumed it was a breaking and entering call, and took off, arriving at a large apartment building on Commonwealth Avenue. The caller told dispatch he was in apartment 13 on the 2nd floor. Wendell and I ran up to the building, sprinting in and up the steps yelling, "Boston Police!" the whole time. We made it up the stairs and found apartment 13. Wendell yelled, "Boston Police," and pounded on the door with his fist. When we heard nothing, I told Smo to step back, and I kicked just below the deadbolt, breaking in the door. We swept the house, and eventually made it to the bedroom where a man was cowering behind his bed. He was middle-aged, about 46. He was balding, and was wearing a bathrobe. Wendell kept his weapon up and asked, "Are you the homeowner?" The man nodded. "Is the intruder still in your home?" The man nodded and pointed across the hall to the room with a closed door. I nodded at Wendell and said, "I'll check. Make sure he's okay and meet me in there." Sliding across the wall, keeping my service pistol pointed at the door, I slowly turned the handle of the old home's door. I swung it open, and quickly, standing inside was a man in a gray suit facing the window away from me. I pointed my service pistol at him and yelled, "Boston Police, on the ground." He didn't move. I began to reach for my handcuffs with my other hand. I slowly approached the suspect, who turned around to face me. I stumbled backwards. I was staring at Albert DeSalvo, a man who died in 1973 and was also the Boston Strangler. He had a strange smile on his face, and as I regained my bearings, he disappeared. Like smoke whispering into the air, he was just gone. Wendell, hearing me yelling from just a few moments earlier, joined me in this room. He asked me what happened, and I tried to explain it to him, but he just looked at me like I was crazy. I wasn't really sure who to call, but the fire department ran some tests and found there was a dangerous level of carbon monoxide in the building, which was then evacuated. That's what everyone attributed to me seeing Albert DeSalvo. I suppose this is what I attribute to it as well. It just felt so real. I'm not sure what to believe, really. The BPD's official stance: visual hallucination caused by carbon monoxide. The oddity that is Officer Jackson Baugh. This isn't really an odd experience, just something I've noticed about one of the guys I work with. Jackson Baugh is 27 years old. He's been working on the South End department for about a year when I started noticing odd behaviors about Jackson. Firstly, he is insanely intelligent. He has a degree from Harvard and studied at MIT for a year, and yet he's working the night shift in the department that gets the most work. It's far beneath him to be working here. I don't get it. Another odd thing? Every one of his cases has a 100% solve rate. Now, sure, a million people work on any given case, but a 100% solve rate is unheard of. And yet, I think I'm the only one to notice. A few weeks after I saw the Boston Strangler, we had a family mixer for National Police Week. None of Officer Ba's family was there. When I asked him about it, he said they were busy and dropped the subject. I was convinced there was something odd going on here. I invited him over to my house to have dinner with me and Vanessa. He declined. On the night of April 4th, I was on a shift with Ba. Two local kids had shoplifted liquor from one of the gas stations in South End. It's the same shit kids in my class used to do in high school. Ba and I were getting ready to call their parents when they took off. I was able to grab one and put him in the back of the squad car. I then followed Ba, who was chasing after the other kid, who was about 25 feet in front of him. I was about 10 feet behind the both of them. They turned a corner, and by the time I got there, Officer Ba already had the kid by the arm and pressed against the wall. I'm telling you right now, there is no way he closed the gap in that amount of time. Usain Bolt couldn't have closed the gap that quickly. We took him back to the squad car and called both their parents after they begrudgingly gave us their phone numbers. The kids' parents came to collect them, and that was pretty much the end of our night, but all I could think about was how quickly Jackson had moved. I mentioned it to Vanessa when I woke up the next morning. She said that I was just being crazy, and that maybe the kid had tripped or something. I told her I agreed, but I didn't. There were no scuff marks on the kid's pants or shirt. He didn't trip. He was running at full speed with a large gap between him and Jackson, and Ba somehow caught up. I planned to ask him about it when we had a shift together again, but I never got the chance. 2 weeks and 2 days later on April 13th, inexplicably, Jackson Ba resigned from the police department. His desk was empty, and in 5 minutes he was gone. I mentioned the weird stuff to the captain I talked about the alley monster with. He said, and I quote, "Yeah, he was weird. So what? Being weird isn't a crime. Get out of my office." So that was the end of that. I had more pressing work to do, so I suppose I forgot about Officer Ba. We used to talk about the weird stuff he did sometimes in the break room. I tried to find him on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc. But it seems like he's not on any social media. Jackson was weird, but he was a fantastic police officer, and I hope he's okay. The BPD's official statement, NA. The April UFO sighting. This is a quick story, but just a few hours after Jackson quit at about 4 a.m., we got about a dozen or so calls about a UFO sighting over Copley Square. I didn't drive out there myself, but two officers, Cassandra Tuttleman and Gregory N. Overdead. They said they saw something, but couldn't be sure what. The next morning, the Hanscom Air Force Base announced that they had been doing weather balloon testing, and a few had drifted into the city. That was enough for me, and most of the people in the office. Still, we got a bunch of letters from a tinfoil hat-wearing lady named Allison Wesley. She's our local conspiracy theorist, and we get about 10 letters a year from her. She called it a cover-up, but I doubt it. Probably was just weather balloons. The BPD's official statement: a weather balloon drifted into the city, which was mistaken as an unidentified flying object. The bar that doesn't exist. Every so often we hear about a bar that doesn't exist. It's always the same story. A young, out-of-town man, it has never been a woman, comes into the station and says that the night before, he went out for a drink and walked into a bar either called the Lucky Tap or Bakey's. He stays for 1 or 2 drinks and then leaves. When he gets back to his hotel, he discovers that he's missing his wallet or his credit card or some other personal effect. He figures he'll get it in the morning. He goes back in the morning only to find that the building is abandoned, that the forgotten item is sitting on the steps of the building. This has been a case that has been puzzling the BPD since before I even worked there. We usually get about 2 a year, sometimes more. As far as I can tell, the first case happened in September of 1993, and has been happening ever since. The strangest case I was a part of, me and Officer Anton were on a shift together. Remember the greasy slime ball? It was a pretty slow night, and so we were just driving around South End, waiting for anything to come in. I think we drove down every street in South End that night. So when a man came in the next morning and gave us the same story, but said that the bar was in South End, that confused both me and Anton. Every night shift officer was told to look out for the names of the bar that didn't exist, and so we had been. We didn't see anything. Nothing. He described a neon sign that had a clover leaf and a tap on it. We didn't see any of that. It's not like we can launch a full investigation either, because no crime is being committed that we know of. Sure, maybe trespassing, but there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence there was ever even a bar called the Lucky Tap or Bakey's. The working theory currently is that people are breaking into abandoned buildings and building a bar and then tearing it down in one night. Personally, I think that's ridiculous. There's a vital detail we're missing, and that's the motive. They don't steal anything from these men. Everything is always returned right on the step. We've tried staking out different abandoned buildings, but it never works. Currently, it's still on the list of strange and unsolved cases. The BPD's official statement? Unsolved. A room full of dead mobsters. I have no doubt that this is the most disturbing thing that happened to me while I was working in South End. It was also the final case I ever worked on in South End. We were getting many noise complaints from the Fort Point district. Fort Point is mostly warehouses, but it was a dying district. The warehouse had pretty much all dried up, so it was just all abandoned warehouses. There were a few that were still up and running, but a few of them had been turned into apartment complexes. It was about 5 a.m. when I was just wrapping up my shift when the call came in. It was a woman who lived in one of the apartment buildings. She said that some asshole was playing trumpet music in the abandoned warehouse next door. I was once again with Officer Anton James, and we drove to the abandoned building. I figured she had meant that someone was playing trumpet music, like on a radio, but no. As I stepped out of my car, I could hear it. Some asshole playing trumpet in an empty building. I told Officer Anton to go around the back door, and the larger man sighed and began to lumber around the building. I entered through the front door, which was difficult to open. This place had been abandoned since the 60s, and as a result, the door was rusted almost entirely shut, and I had to really push on it to get it open. Once I finally entered, I shined my flashlight around the building, but didn't see anything. There were no walls. It was just a massive football field-sized building, with nothing but heaps of trash. I saw no one. I continued to follow the sound of the trumpet to the back right corner. I called out, "Hey Anton, you in here?" I heard him trying to force into one of the doors, but it wouldn't budge. "No, I can't get in." I should have figured. "Alright, fine. Just go around and enter from the door I got open." I heard him sigh loudly and start to make his way back around the building. I could now hear that the trumpet music was coming from below me. I shined my flashlight to the floor. There were handles attached to a large metal grate. It kind of looked like the exterior doors to a basement. I pulled on the metal handle and the door didn't budge. I had to really pull before it started to move at all. I wasn't able to get it open on my own, so once Officer Anton made it around, he and I both pulled on the doors to get them to swing open. What sat in front of us was a long staircase, which descended into the darkness of the earth. I could still hear the trumpet playing at the bottom of the steps, so I began to descend. James grabbed my wrist. "What the hell are you doing?" I pulled my wrist out of his grasp. "Investigating." I continued down the steps with my flashlight. As I was about halfway down, he said, "Well, I'm not coming." I continued on replying, "Great, it'll make my job easier." I reached the bottom of the steps, and in front of me was a wooden door. I grabbed the handle and pushed it open. I couldn't hear the music anymore as I stepped in. There was a light switch on the wall right next to me as I entered. I flipped it on. These old 1960s lamps, flipped on and sitting around a poker table, were 8 fully decomposed bodies. Bullet holes riddled the walls and table. Bones were all around the floor and on the table. These 8 idiots had killed each other. I fell backward out the door and back to the steps, looking horrified at the 8 dead men in the room. What I didn't know then, but I do now, is that I had just solved the longest running cold case in the history of the BPD. They were all later determined to be missing members of the Bianchi crime family, including the brother of leader Lou Bianchi and Vin Bianchi. They had been there for more than 40 years. Something went wrong with the poker game, and they all shot each other. We'll never really know what went down in the basement. The one thing I have seen ignored in every statement. In every report, nothing mentions the trumpet. There was a trumpet in the room, and you want to know what the BPD's official statement was? BPD's official statement. The wind blowing through the trumpet caused the noise. That is bullshit. Not only is it impossible, it's impossible that anyone could really think that. That's what I told Captain Shit for Brains, who told me to drop it. I wasn't going to drop it. When he heard I was talking about it again, he told me if I cared that much to take it up with the commissioner. He was joking, but that is exactly what I did. William Dolphin, the commissioner of police in Boston at the time, worked in the BPD headquarters in the center of the city. I walked right into his office, told him the situation, and requested a transfer. He granted that request. My father passed soon after, pancreatic cancer. If I could start again, I wouldn't have done my time in South Boston any differently. This post, I only talk about the strange or bad things that happened while I was working at the D6. It doesn't mention any of the great things that happened to me while working there. I invited most of my coworkers there, to mine and Vanessa's wedding in the summer. In August of that year, I started working at the D4 by Fenway. Nothing strange happened while I was an officer there. However, in November I got promoted to detective. No more late nights running traffic stops. This would be the beginning of the truly horrifying. It happened to me about 4 years ago. I've been keeping this story as a secret until today. 4 years ago, I used to live in Seattle. After my ex and I broke up, I was forced to move to Renton, to the bad part of Renton. To be more specific, Maple Valley Highway. My apartment complex looked like it used to be a motel. It had a weird layout. I even had a window in my kitchen which led to a dark room without any doors. At least the view was nice. Right outside of my apartment there was a river and a forest. I would sometimes see animals there. My friends used to joke this area is a perfect hideout spot for a serial killer. We tried to sneak into a hidden room, which was behind my kitchen, but the window was too small, and there was no outside entrance. Sometime later, I hung a painting over in and never thought of it again. But the story is not about this weird room. It was a one-bedroom apartment, and my bedroom had a small walk-in closet. It had a terrible design, and my clothes would fall down all the time. I don't like the cluster, so my closet was always clean. I even didn't have any boxes there. During my first 2 weeks, I could barely sleep. I would always hear something move inside of my walls, near the closet, but I assumed there was just raccoons. Again, there was a forest right in front of my apartment, so I would often see them chilling outside. Right after I moved into this apartment, I would often throw parties to keep myself distracted after a breakup. I would have people over all the time, but no one would ever walk into my bedroom without asking my permission first. Of course, there were drinks involved at these parties, and I would often wake up after a wild party in the middle of my bedroom, with no memory of last night. That has been this way until I noticed my clothes and food starting to go missing. I asked my friends around, but they swore they didn't take anything. But each time after I had a party, something was lost the very next day. Eventually I got tired of this and I ended my party season. I started living my regular life, waking up, going to work, having a quick lunch with a friend, going to my second job, buying groceries on my way back home, sleeping. As you can tell, I had a very busy schedule, and I would fall asleep as soon as my head touches the pillow. But, you know, never have I had a restful sleep in that apartment. I kept hearing some movements inside of my walls. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, because I had a feeling someone was watching me. This is when I have developed a habit of falling asleep with my light on. I should probably mention I would discover the lights off the next morning, but since I'm a huge skeptic, I would tell myself I was the one who turned them off in the middle of the night. Sometimes, I would have people over at my place, and they would refuse to stay over again, and every time I asked them why, I would get one response: "Your apartment creeps me out. There's something unsettling about it." So, about 6 or 8 months into my living in that hell place, I started discovering my bed was undone when I was back home from work. But this is literally impossible. I always get it done, no matter what. And my food was going missing again. Sometimes, I would even discover my towels were wet, as if someone just used them. Later that week, a loud clapping sound woke me in the middle of the night. I got out of my bed and heard the sound of something really heavy falling down. My hands were shaking. I turned the lights on and nothing. My apartment was clean and I was the only one in it. Maybe it was a neighbor dropping something. A few days later, something started to smell funny in my room. The smell was getting progressively worse. Have you ever left a raw steak outside when it's over 90 degrees Fahrenheit by a dumpster? Well, it smelled even worse than that. It was going to the point I couldn't even stay inside of the apartment. My neighbors were complaining about the odor as well. This is when I called the maintenance staff to inspect my apartment and crawl space. A maintenance guy checked every corner of my apartment before he opened my closet up. The smell was unbearable there. He knocked on a wall to discover an empty spot behind it. Took him a few minutes to remove the wall. It took me a second to freeze in fear and start screaming. What I saw still chases me in my nightmares. There was a decomposing man. He was holding my dress, which got lost a few months ago. Of course the police were called, so it turned out it was a homeless man. He had been living in the crawl space of my apartment for almost a year. He would eat my food, sleep in my bed, and take a shower while I was at work. He was the one stealing my clothes, and I don't want to think what he would do to it. He would watch me sleep and take a shower. Police discovered small peeking holes in my bathroom. He had a stroke and fell down. This is why I woke up in the middle of the night that one day. I would feel his presence, but I was too skeptical and tired back then to do anything about it. Of course, I moved out shortly after the investigation was done. To this day, I can't fall asleep unless I check my closet. To this day, I wake up screaming. I don't know what's worse, that I had a homeless man living inside of my closet, or that I had his corpse for over a week before it was discovered. I was driving down an empty road stretching as far as the eye can see, at night. No car in sight, but it was pretty normal. I've taken this route many times. As I was driving, in the distance, I could see a small shadowy figure on the floor, motionless. I turned on my full beam headlights for better visibility, and it turned out to be a dead dog laying in the middle of the road. I thought I had to move it out of the road to prevent a hazard, so I started to slow down. As I approached the dog, I got out of the car and left the door open so I could swiftly head back in. I picked the dog up and placed it on the side of the road. While I was walking back to my car, there was a car speeding towards me in the distance, so I hurried to my car and drove off. Didn't want anyone to think I was dumping a body. After a while, the car behind me caught up and started to flash their headlights at me. I kept signaling in every way to overtake me, but nothing was working. But I managed to arrive closer to my neighborhood, so I just kept driving. I took a right, and the car behind me took a right. My heartbeat obviously started to increase, but I thought it might be a coincidence. So I took a left. The car took a left. Then I took a right. The car took a right. I used a complex route and the car took the same route. I arrived home and, out of fear, I jumped out of the car and ran inside the house and closed the door. The other car pulled up and my heart was racing. I could feel the heartbeat in my throat. Then there was a knock. I wanted to act like I wasn't home, but the car saw me get out of the car and run in. I mustered whatever courage and bravery I had left and opened the door. And there was a big, built man, smiling. My heartbeat gradually slowed down. The man said, "Hi." He gave me a sort of worrying smile, and immediately, I had a go at him for how he was driving. He apologized and said, he saw me slow down and get out of the car in the middle of the road. As I was walking to the front of the car, something or someone ran into my car and I drove off without noticing. My body froze. I felt a single drop of sweat roll down my forehead. I can feel my heartbeat in my throat. My fear was visible. I went pale as I gazed at my car. Then the man turned and looked towards the car. It is like our minds were in sync. We both started walking towards the car, slowly and quietly as to not alert whatever or whoever was in there. With every step, the hair all over my body stood up and my heartbeat was increasing and getting heavy. We looked in. Nothing. I hope you sleep well. Smells like crap down there, said Paige. She was on all fours, peering into the open manhole in the middle of the street. I mean, it's a sewer, I pointed out. I realize that, Garrett. I'm just saying. She stood up, her eyes drifting to the gun poking out of my jeans pocket. Are you sure a bolt's gonna kill that thing? No. That's why we're taking backup. The flamethrower, the knife, our flamethrower, was technically a can of hairspray and a lighter. I would have liked to have the real deal, but it wasn't something two struggling college students like us could afford. We'd practiced with our makeshift model, and it worked fairly well. Paige shivered, even though it was early May, and we were standing in afternoon sunshine. God, Garrett. If that thing in the sewer is what you think it is. If it's what I think it is, I said darkly. We're screwed. All of us. The first sign that we had a situation on our hands was the decline in wildlife. The grassy yard behind the dorms and the little patch of woods beyond it had always teemed with small mammals, squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits, mice, and birds. Their exuberant springtime chirping used to wake me every morning at 5. This year, virtually nothing. We were living in our own silent spring. Then pets started going missing. I'd see the notices on community bulletin boards. Dozens of desperate pleas crowding out the ads for babysitting services and used cars. Missing dog, $100 reward. Have you seen Lulu? Please call day or night. Some people thought a virus had decimated the wildlife. Others said coyotes were coming down out of the hills to prey on defenseless suburban animals. So far, nobody had come up with any definitive answers. 4 days ago, I'd been thinking about finals then vanished animals as I strode into Henderson Hall and took a seat in the middle row. I thought I'd done pretty well so far. I had one more final tomorrow, then I'd be heading back to my hometown, 2 states away. I glanced around in surprise. This lecture hall held 300 students, and it was completely filled. I'd had no idea our volunteer group was so large. Our college wasn't a major university, but it had a robust biology program. When I'd arrived as a freshman nearly 3 years ago, one of the professors was knee-deep in a medical research project funded by an anonymous billionaire. Dr. Bennett and his team of post-grad students were just starting human studies using paid volunteers. I signed up, mainly because I needed the $1,000. Participation amounted to an occasional injection and monthly blood tests. Easy peasy, but we were never really told much about the project, what it was, how it was progressing, until last week. Dr. B had emailed us to announce that the study was complete, and he was ready to share the results with us. The hall quieted as Dr. Bennett stepped up to the lectern. He was mid-50-ish, a thin man with more hair on his chin than on his head. Students, he said, smiling broadly, I am pleased to announce a development of historic proportions. With your help, we have cured cancer. In fact, everyone who took part in the study has already achieved lifelong immunity to the disease. Voices buzzed incredulously. Cancer? We'd had no idea. I'm ready to announce this breakthrough to the world, he continued, but I wanted you to hear about it first. Dr. B's approach was truly revolutionary. His team had developed an agent that turned on a dormant gene in the body's T cells. The gene created an environment so inhospitable to cancer that any abnormal cells were driven out of the body. Once turned on, the gene could never be turned off. It was both inheritable and dominant, which meant immunity would be passed to future generations. A girl in front of me raised her hand. You said cancer cells are driven out of the body. How does the cancer get out? Like, what if you have some big tumor? Dr. B gave the girl a mildly reproachful look. All tumors, even large ones, are broken down into individual cells. The cells leave the body the same way waste materials do, through defecation and urination. So we're literally flushing cancer down the toilet? The girl said. Yeah, Dr. B declared. That's exactly what we're doing. Cancer is smart, but we're smarter. A guy in the front row chanted. I recognized that quote from a radio ad for a nearby cancer treatment center. I'd been hearing the ad for months, and each time I did, a chill went through me. Cancer is smart. That statement suggested that cancer had a brain, and it was a sentient being. And if that was true, we were in big trouble. My mind raced, skimming over what I'd just heard. I thought about toilet flushes and ousted cancer cells, dark, dank sewers and missing animals. My unease deepened as I began to see how the dots might connect. I raised my hand. Sir, are you saying this agent doesn't actually kill the cancer cells? It just chases them out of the body? That's correct. And they end up in the sewers? All those living cancer cells. Dr. Bennett bobbled his head impatiently. Sure, they're alive when they leave the body, but only briefly. Cancer cells are like any other living organism. To stay alive, they have to feed. Once they leave the host body, they can't do that. They die. He scanned the audience, looking for the next raised hand, but I wasn't finished. What if they don't die? I asked, getting to my feet. What if they find things to feed on in the sewers? What if they clump together and keep growing, like a tumor, mutating, adapting, maybe learning how to move? Dr. B didn't even try to hide his smirk. Watch a lot of sci-fi, do you, young man? A couple of people snickered. The girl at the end of my row said, 50 years ago, cell phones and self-driving cars were science fiction. I glanced down the row and saw the girl looking back at me. It was Paige from my calculus class. We'd been doing some low-level flirting all semester, though I'd never worked up the nerve to ask her out. Somebody asked about the impact of a cancer cure on Big Pharma, and a debate ensued. Dr. B never did get back to answering my questions. Paige caught up with me as I left the building. Do you really think there's some kind of cancer monster in the sewers? I shot her a grin. It sounds so crazy when you say it, but yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, 300 students took part in a study. Sure, we're young and healthy, but I bet at least a few of us had some abnormal cells over the past 2.5 years. And those cells ended up in the sewers, if they kept living, growing. I shook my head, unable to imagine what they might look like today. Paige pulled me off the sidewalk, away from passerbys. In a low voice she said, I saw something the other night. A noise woke me. An animal screeching. I think. I looked out my window and saw this thing. It was dragging a dead dog across the street. I saw it go into the storm drain and pull the dog in after it. Shit. I muttered. I'd wanted so badly to be wrong about this. What did it look like? I couldn't see it very well. At the time, I thought it was a really big rat, but now, I don't know. It wasn't really shaped like an animal. It was lumpy. I couldn't see a head or legs. It just looked like a blob. Or a tumor, I suggested. We regarded each other soberly. We knew what we had to do. As a pre-med student, Paige had access to lab equipment that could tell us exactly what the thing in the sewer was. All we had to do was chop off a piece of it and bring it back to the lab, and that meant going into the sewer and hunting it down. What a romantic first date. The sewer tunnel was rounded on top and flat on the bottom, its walls and ceiling done in sloppy brickwork. I led the way, sloshing through 3 inches of water on the concrete floor. The stench intensified as we went deeper. The sewage system in this town was old. The storm sewers and the sanitary sewers shared the same tunnels. We kept seeing wisps of toilet paper swirling through the water. After we'd been walking for 6 or 7 minutes, I stopped abruptly. What? Said Paige. I stepped aside to let her see the pile of bones on the tunnel floor. Hard to tell what they were, because they were picked clean and jumbled together, but some of them were pretty big, which made me think dogs. Paige snapped some pictures with her cell phone. Up ahead was a 4-way intersection. We peered right and then left. The passage to the left went about 50 feet and then disappeared around a curve. A patch of fog floated ghost-like near the curve. We exchanged apprehensive glances and headed that way. A few feet past the curve, we came to a spot where the brick wall had crumbled away, leaving an alcove just the right size for a small religious statue. But the Virgin Mary wasn't what we found. Paige saw it first. She grasped and grabbed me by my arm. I stared in horror and fascination. The thing in the alcove was the size of a large house cat, but looked more like a pile of dirty laundry. It was made up of mottled gray-brown lumps stuck together, like modeling clay, and interspersed with patches of what appeared to be rat fur. One side was pulsating, as if the thing were breathing, but how could that be? Cancer didn't have lungs. I think it's sleeping, I whispered. I couldn't help gagging. The thing smelled like a mix of raw sewage, rotten meat, and vomit. This isn't what I saw, Paige said in a tremulous voice. It's smaller. Besides, there's no way this thing could be responsible for all those missing animals. I know, I said somberly. I supposed I'd always known. I just hadn't wanted to say it out loud, but I said it now. There isn't just one sewer monster. There's probably a bunch of them. Got the knife? Paige asked. Let's collect our sample and get out of here. I slipped the knife out of my backpack. Paige pulled the specimen jar out of hers. And then the creature woke up. A single brown eyeball appeared in the center of the thing. The kind you see on German shepherds. That eye zeroed in on us, and then, impossibly, a mouth sprouted above it. A tiny cat mouth with 4 sharp fangs. The creature hissed and started to squiggle towards us. Paige screamed. I fired the gun. Once, twice, 3 times. The creature kept coming. Paige grabbed the hairspray and lighter and blasted the thing with fire. It backed into its alcove, shrieking. Paige kept the flame on it until the hairspray can was empty. By then, the thing had stopped moving. Its skin was charred black. Wait, said Paige, as I raised the knife to slice off a tail-like appendage. Why don't we just take the whole thing? It's not that big. I threw her a dubious look. Are you sure it's dead? No, but we need to show it to Dr. Bennett. Paige had a heavy-duty trash bag in her backpack. After giving the creature a few minutes to cool down, we dropped it inside and sealed the bag up tight with duct tape. I offered to carry it in my backpack because that seemed like the gentlemanly thing to do. But I was totally freaked. If some pulsating tentacle came slithering up the back of my neck, I was dropping that backpack and running like hell. Paige led the way back. When we reached the intersection with the main passage, she let out a scream that splintered my eardrums. I looked up and let out a cry of my own. Looming before us was another monster, this one the size of a refrigerator. It was shapeless, like a mound of dirt, with 3 eyeballs positioned at random spots in a blubbery flesh. 2 baleful dog eyes, and a glowing green cat's eye. 2 mouths, both of which looked like they'd come from large dogs. In one spot, part of a plastic water bottle was fused into the creature's skin. I could see raw pink flesh beneath the clear plastic. The light from my headlamp skimmed up over the creature. Sticking out of its top, like a rooster's comb, was a human hand, greenish gray with death rot. It wore a silver ring set with a purple stone. The thing lunged at us, its 2 dog mouths chomping furiously. I moved in front of Paige, the knife still in my hand, and stabbed the thing in one of its dog eyes. It screeched and waddled backwards. Paige and I pushed past it and sprinted back to the manhole. Oh my god, said Paige as we slid the manhole cover into place. She was shaking all over. Those things. They use parts from the animals they kill, the trash they find in the sewers, to make better bodies for themselves. Yeah, and they're not going to stop at eyes and mouths, I said grimly. Pretty soon, they'll be using other body parts, muscles for strength, legs so they can move faster, brains to help them think. Did you see that hand? Paige said, her voice fracturing on a sob. I'd know that ring anywhere. It belongs to my roommate's boyfriend. She hasn't heard from him for weeks. I mean, the guy's always been a jerk. She figured he dumped her for some other girl, but obviously... Paige, I said. She scrambled to her feet when she saw where I was pointing. The monster was in the storm drain at the edge of the street. We could see its remaining dog eye peering out at us. Don't worry, it can't get out, I said. The storm drain was a 6-inch high by 4 feet long gash in the side of the curb, too narrow to accommodate a fridge-sized sewer monster. And yet, as we watched, the creature flattened itself and started oozing out of the opening. No one was around to help us. The campus was all but deserted now that the term was over. Paige snapped a picture and we took off down the street. When I glanced back, I saw the monster retreating into the storm drain. Maybe it didn't like sunlight. Maybe it knew it couldn't catch us. Maybe it was going back to its lair to formulate a new strategy. What's this so-called life and death situation you need to discuss with me? Dr. Bennett asked, impatiently. We'd called him at home and were lucky to find him there. He was getting ready to go on vacation with his wife. We'd like you to tell us what this is, Paige said, gesturing toward the microscope. Dr. Bennett huffed irritably and peered at the slide Paige had prepared. It's cancer, of course. Classic presentation of abnormal cell growth. What if I told you, Paige said, that the specimen came from this? She stepped over to the aquarium we'd found in a storage room and pulled the tarp off the top. The charred sewer monster was inside, its tiny cat mouth half open. Dr. B staggered backwards. What in God's name is that? Science fiction in the flesh, I said dryly. We told him everything, taking turns, talking fast. Paige showed him the pictures she'd taken. We watched Dr. B get paler and paler. Have you announced your breakthrough yet? Asked Paige. No, I haven't. His voice was barely a whisper. Okay, that's good, I said. So if you just abort the whole program, we can stop this thing. A SWAT team can go into the sewers and kill those creatures. That'll be the end of it. He was shaking his head before I'd even finished. You don't understand. This problem is bigger than that. So much bigger. Those injections we'd gotten during the study, they were cancer cells. All 300 of us were repeatedly given cancer, and then those cancer cells fled our bodies. They were flushed into the sewers. Any abnormal cells produced by our bodies in the future would end up in the same place. There wasn't even time to think about the wrongness of Dr. B's approach. The stunning criminality of it. Cancer had been in our sewers for nearly 3 years, feeding, growing, mutating. And it was in other sewers too, all over the country and beyond. Because those of us in the study, we didn't just stay on campus. We went home at Christmas time and over the summer. We went on vacations. We took trips to visit friends and relatives. Wherever we went, it went with us. So even if Dr. B's anti-cancer program ended today, even if nobody got immunized ever again, we'd still be doomed. Dr. B staggered down the hall to his office. We heard the single gunshot and knew he'd taken his own life. Paige thought that she saw a burnt creature twitch and insisted we dumped it down the manhole. It landed with a splash and a thunk. The sun was just starting to set as we headed for my car. We were almost there when we saw them. 15 or 20 monsters, some oozing out of storm drains, others already on the street. Big ones, little ones, medium-sized ones, all moving towards us at the same moderate speed, like some gruesome flesh mob. Holy shit, I gasped. I had no idea there were so many of them. One of the creatures, short and squat like a pile of manure, suddenly reared up in front of us, stretching to nearly my own height. I shoved it forcefully away, recoiling at the bumpy, slimy feel of monster flesh against my palms. Paige and I raced from my car, dove inside, and slammed the doors shut. Several lumpy bodies hit the side of the car with audible splats. We sat in stunned silence, watching those alien bodies writhe and waddle about on the street. Paige said dazedly, "It's almost like they were waiting for us, like they were thinking with one brain." I didn't even want to think about the implications of that. I stuck my key in the ignition and said, "Let's get out of here." I swerved around the bigger creatures and ran over a couple of the smaller ones. Getting squished by a 3,000-pound car didn't seem to faze them. When I glanced in my rearview mirror, they were scuttling after us like legless spiders. On our way out of town, we stopped at the local police department to report the situation on campus. The sergeant at the front desk listened impassively and said he'd have someone check it out, but I could tell he didn't believe us. Probably had us pegged as a couple of marijuana users in the throes of a paranoid high. Paige and I are now heading for Washington, D.C., more than 1,000 miles away, because the effort to fight the monsters will surely start there. I don't know whether we'll make it. The creatures seem to be tracking us. We've seen them in some of the towns we've passed through. mostly watching us from storm drains. But last night, a pair the size and shape of overstuffed trash bags stormed our car as we were leaving a gas station. They were moving faster than the creatures we'd encountered on campus, but we managed to outrace them. We think they want to keep us from reaching DC, and they'll probably get more aggressive as we approach our destination. Today, as Paige drove, I typed this account into my cell phone, and I'm going to upload it to several websites. If you're reading this and haven't heard about the monsters, it means either that we didn't make it to DC, or that our nation's leaders didn't believe us when we told them about the coming apocalypse. Either way, we need your help. Spread the word, warn others, and please, please keep away from storm drains. The monsters are going to keep spreading until they're in every town, every sewer system. They'll keep mutating. They'll get stronger, faster, more resourceful. They've already figured out how to squeeze out of a storm drain. Soon, they'll be oozing out of toilets and shower drains. People won't be safe in their own homes. Cancer is smart, but we're smarter. Let's hope to God we are.